If I gave you a quick pop quiz about intervals right now, how would you do? Not only do we have to know these super quickly, but we have to be able to play them on our instrument. And it's so helpful to understand intervals deeply in everything we do as jazz players. So let's do that now. Welcome to Learn Jazz Bass with Matt Rybicki. I'm glad that you're here. We're talking about intervals, which is very sort of fundamental to understanding music in general. But I promise you, if you are not super comfortable with them, putting time in to really reinforce them is going to help you in tons of different ways in your playing, your listening, your composing, and so on and so forth. It's really important. You know, oftentimes what we do to remember the sound of an interval is to use a mnemonic device. So we use familiar melodies, and generally we're trying to get the very beginning first couple notes as the reference point. That doesn't always work out. But what I've done here is include a list of mnemonic devices, many of them super common that people use, at the link below. But what I'd love for you to do is actually contribute in the comments, please, and I will change that document to reflect other examples that you might have. For example, a descending major seventh interval is very difficult to find in pop music, jazz music, or pop music. There's only a couple of examples. So if someone has some other one that they would like me to include on that list, I'm happy to do that and change that for future viewers. So you'll be helping out others and paying it forward, which is cool. So yes, these mnemonic devices are helpful and we should definitely know them, but let's go each interval at a time and look at sort of how they lay on the bass and talk a bit about them a little bit. We won't spend too much time on each one of them. Let's do that now. A unison is the exact same note in the exact same register, and it doesn't matter the instrument, and it's kind of a formality to include it, but I want it to be all-inclusive. So if you can't hear a unison, it's important that you spend some time working on your ear training, because that is certainly something that you should be able to identify. Some examples of popular songs would be Happy Birthday, Jingle Bells, da da da, same note, same. A Ghost of a Chance is one jazz tune that uses it too. And rather than, of course, everybody always starts on the note C, sort of when talking about stuff like this, let's just do G as an example. And I'm also going to put on the screen me playing electric so you can see the relationship of the shapes of these. So of course a unison is the same note, G. Again, same register, same octave. All right, now let's move on to the next interval. A minor second is, of course, a half step. And now we start to get into ascending and descending versions of these intervals. So if we have an ascending minor second interval, that's just a half step away or one fret on the electric. So it would be G, and ascending would be to A flat or G sharp. And descending would be G to G flat or G to F sharp. So G, nothing super complicated there. Familiar mnemonic devices, like for ascending minor second, would be the jazz tune What's New? What's new? Da 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 da. Or of course, Jaws. Right, the Jaws theme. So that is something that is readily available and very common to us, I'm sure, but be sure that you drill those up and down, because it's an important aspect of approaching target notes in walking lines. A major second is also what we call a whole step, and I wanted to take a second and just remind you that when we're talking about numbers here, as always, it's in relationship to a major scale. So if we say a minor third or a flat third, we're talking about what would be the third, the naturally occurring third of the major scale of the note we're starting with. So if we're starting with G, we're talking about G major scale. The naturally occurring third note in that scale is B. A minor third would be B flat. You're taking it down a third. Okay, so we are on major seconds now, and this is a whole step, also very familiar to us, I'm sure. If we've got G, we've got G to open A, generally what we do on upright, or electric players will often play closed, G, and we can play it closed on upright too, if we can play it in tune. Ascending. And then descending is a whole step down, G to F. Right? Same on electric, generally. And tunes that would be familiar for this, the ascending would be like Body and Soul, like that. And it goes up and down too, so that's up and down. Up a step, and then when you start play the E flat again, when you go from F to E flat in Body and Soul, that's a descending whole step. Oftentimes we can also think about Satin Doll. I'm just trying to remember the name. Satin Doll, da 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 da, dee do. That's descending, dee do dee, and that's back up a whole step. So very common and a part of a major scale, obviously moving in whole steps. So let's move on now. Next is a minor third, and I mentioned that briefly in talking about in relationship to the major scale. So if we're thinking about G major, like we are in this instance, a G major scale would be G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. The third note, 1, 2, 3, is B. If a minor third would be a half step down from that, so B flat. So we're going G to B flat, that's ascending, G to B flat. And B flat to G is descending. You can, on electric, of course, you can also play with your fourth finger. This is more of a reach. You don't have to really shift generally. G to A, B flat here. And so that would be one, you would go 1, 2, 3 frets, G to B flat. So that would be fret 3, 4, 5, 6, 3 to 6. And descending is just the opposite. This shape, going that shape there, skipping a couple frets on electric, is where I started conceiving of minor triads and minor thirds. But having played upright much longer, now it's much easier. And so I prefer to play them here, like this, 4, 1. And common tunes with this would be like A Foggy Day. A foggy day goes up a third, a minor third. And descending, the one I think about, there's a lot of examples. The one I think about is actually Lullaby and Goodnight. I'm sorry, that I think of that ascending. And then descending, like if we do What Is This Thing Called Love? Descending, yeah. Or if I play open. And a major third is that naturally occurring third from the major scale, from where we're starting. So in this instance, we're starting on G, so the major third is B. And this is the shape on the fingerboard. On electric, it's like you go 1 string up and 1 fret back. So the 3rd fret on the E string and the 2nd fret on the A string. You can play it closed, but it's much more efficient there. And descending is just the opposite. Tunes I think about that relate to this major third is, the first thing really honestly is a major triad. Like, we spend so much time over the years playing arpeggios and singing them and ear training and so on and so forth, that that's the first thing I actually identify with, is that just part of a major triad. If you're if you do solfege, do, mi, sol, mi, do. Other jazz tunes or other tunes, like I Can't Get Started is one, if we do it in using these notes. That's the major third, around the world. We could also do like Michael Rowed the Boat Ashore, that spiritual tune. We could also do When the Saints Go Marching In, like if we were to play it here in F, we can go this F to A is the major third, right? Michael Rowed the Boat Ashore would be like Michael at major third there. Really important interval, one of the defining sounds in either a major or a dominant chord. All right, let's go on to the next one. Next is a perfect fourth, and that's a very common movement as far as the roots of chords as chords move in harmony. Harmony often moves up in fourths, so it's certainly a shape you've done before. It would be, in this instance, G to C. And so it would be the same fret up a step. Up a string is what it would be. Descending would be the opposite, C to G. And the tunes that I'm thinking of are like, for me, again, the most common one for me is Here Comes the Bride. Up a fourth. But we've also got Doxy from Sonny Rollins, amazing tune. There. F to B flat is a perfect fourth up. Descending would be like Softly as in a Morning Sunrise, Yardbird Suite, and so on. All right, let's go on to the next one. All right, next is the tritone, and that is, as you may know, the same interval that it would encompass a sharp four or a raised fourth or a flatted fifth. It's the exact same note. Depends on the context as to what you would call it, but the sound is the same. In our instance, we're starting with G, and so the tritone would be D flat or C sharp here. And ascending, there's not a ton of jazz tunes that do that I can find, but I'm familiar with the Broadway show West Side Story. I hope that many of you are. There's a great Oscar Peterson album of tunes from that. And the tune Maria starts with that. Not in that key, but that starts with an ascending tritone. Also, The Simpsons, the TV show, which I would assume you're familiar with, starts with an ascending tritone. A descending tritone, so C sharp to G, C sharp to G, or D flat to G, depending on the context, doesn't also happen a whole lot in like the primary melody of a song, except for Blue 7 from Sonny Rollins. Those are the first two notes, a descending tritone. That's definitely the strongest example from jazz, but if you've got more, let me know. And next is a perfect fifth, and that means that it's not altered, either sharp or flat. And the reason it's called perfect fifth has to do, I believe, with sort of equal temperament and so on and so forth. There's a whole bunch of discussion as to why. Nonetheless, that's a shape you definitely have encountered. Of course, on electric, that would be a G, the third fret to the fifth fret on the A string. But on upright, we often play it open when we're pitzing, playing with our fingers. And it's definitely something that you've encountered before, I'm sure. Descending, same thing. Or 5 to 3, I'm saying fret-wise. The sounds that I associate with this particular interval are, of course, the theme to Star Wars. And also Bagged Groove, which is a great blues if you don't already know it. Now for descending perfect fifths, I mentioned in the last video that I did chronologically that there are the bass part to Seven Steps to Heaven has descending perfect fifths as the main sort of thing we lock onto, like we recognize right away. So C to F is a perfect fifth descending. B flat to E flat is a perfect fifth descending. If we put it with the notes that we're using, D to G, C to F. D to G is a descending fifth. C to F is a descending perfect fifth. And you can also find this in Have You Met Miss Jones and many other kinds of tunes. Let's go on to the next one. And now with the larger intervals, starting with a minor 6, we start to get into a little bit more gray area for many of them where they're not quite as maybe easily identified with many tunes. Part of the reason is because of course, many of the great songwriters of the 20s, 30s, whatever, songwriters of popular song are thinking about vocalists. When you start to get above a perfect fifth, as far as intervals for many sort of average vocalists, it's hard. Plus you want to sell these to people that are playing them on the piano at home and trying to sing them. The bigger the interval, the harder it is for many folks to sing. So now we get into the sixths and sevenths, and yeah, the variation of the sixths and sevenths are a little bit harder. So the next thing is a minor sixth. So we're in the key of G major, let's say. G is 1, A, 3, 4, 5, 6 is E natural. That's a minor sixth, so we're down a half step to E flat. You can also call this a sharp 5 because the perfect fifth was D. We're going up a half step to D sharp, same note. So it's a minor sixth or technically a sharp fifth, but we don't tend to call that like in interval names. Like we don't use the name sharp fifth in an interval name, which is kind of interesting. Nonetheless, so on upright, if we're playing G as our first note, E flat or D sharp is our next note. On electric, you might play the third fret here and then shift slightly or open your hand slightly to reach the sixth fret on the A string. You might have heard it right there, maybe it popped into your head. There's a few melodies, a couple of them by Jobim, that use this interval as part of the main melody early on. The one I think about though is Scott Joplin's Entertainer, the third and fourth notes, and a couple notes after. So da da dee do dee do dee. That's the minor sixth interval that I think about as far as an ascending thing. Descending, there's many options. The one that I think about is the famous tag ending from Duke Ellington from Take the A Train. So in C, that would be, right? So C to E is a minor third. I'm sorry, a minor sixth descending. If we used our notes here, that's what I think about as a reference point for this. But there are others like Chega de Saudade, and there's a part in Misty towards the end, right before the B section. It goes Misty, Misty, right? Right before the bridge. That's a minor sixth descending. So that's another thing that you can think about. Oftentimes, as I said, we try to find the first notes of a melody as these references. All right, let's move on now to major sixth. So for a major sixth, of course, we're talking about E natural here, as we mentioned, and the shape is like this. On electric, it would be the third fret and the second fret on the D string, 2 strings away. Same anywhere. The reference point I use is Take the A Train. You must take the A Train. Or also, for us older folks, the NBC theme from the NBC network starts with that interval. Descending, it's a little bit trickier to find a lot of examples in the jazz thing. Your Weaver of Dreams is often played as a ballad. That has the descending sixth, as well as the sort of spiritual Down by the Riverside has the descending sixth. And I'd love to hear more examples from you if you've got them. Let's move on. A minor seventh, using the notes that we're starting with, would be the naturally occurring seven would be F sharp in the key of in the key of G major. So we are going down a half step to F natural. So G to F natural. Descending is reversing that, F to G. On electric, that would be the same fret, a couple strings away. And there's not a ton of jazz melodies that use this. As I say, many jazz melodies are written for singers. However, there is a really cool tune from West Side Story, again, called Somewhere. And I think I mentioned the Oscar Peterson album. You should check out that album. Anyway, Somewhere is like a ballad, and those are the first two notes of the tune, Somewhere, G. Ascending, there's also the first and third notes of Pure Imagination from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. So that takes a little bit of thought, right? Because it's not two consecutive notes, but in one particular key, it would be Pure Imagination. There. That's up and down. So B flat, in this instance to A flat, B flat to A. In using our notes, G, B flat, so the G to the F is the minor seventh or the flat seven. Descending, it's also a little bit tricky, but Watermelon Man from Herbie Hancock, that is descending. So ba 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 da ba 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 dee ba. So that's a descending minor seventh. And also the Shadow of Your Smile has that in there as well. It's not the first couple notes, there's a pickup and then the drop to the main melody note. So what I'm saying is this B to C sharp is a minor seventh. So hopefully that's helpful for you. Let's move on. So next is a major seventh, and that is of course the seventh degree of an eight note major scale. In this instance, G to F sharp, because we're talking about a G major scale. Descending is reversing it, F sharp to G. Or we go down a half step, F to G flat. A sharp to B, C to D flat. So it's a shape that you want to get under your hands because I think it really locks us into getting that major seven. When a major seven is used in a chord, it helps you to sort of navigate, to me, the fingerboard and the sound and so on and so forth. The melodies that you might associate with it, probably everyone's heard the pop tune from the 80s, Take On Me from Aha, right? There is a major seventh in the chorus. Me, take on me. That's a major seventh. But also Ciora from Lee Morgan has a major seventh in it, in the key that he does it in. It's like E flat to D, E flat to D, E flat. So E flat to D is the major seven. In our key here, doesn't really work down there, does it? It's hard to play, hard to get that to sound right. And descending major seven is very tricky. In fact, there is only pretty much one tune that starts with this interval that everyone talks about, which is the jazz tune I Love You. I mean, it's a standard, I Love You. I love you. That is the major seven, C to D flat. In our instance, F sharp to G. There aren't a whole lot of other instances of this as part of a main melody. However, in Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, which I assume many of you know, towards the end, like the last line of the tune, it goes, sound familiar, right? Or if we play it here, E. And Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. That is a descending major seventh. Let's move on. And the next is another sort of almost formality in a way, but it's important to know and really understand an octave, which is the same note, but up up an octave, up 8, 9 notes. It is the 8th note of the scale. Very self-explanatory, I'm sure you know. For on electric, let's say you're going to start on the 3rd fret again with G and play this next G closed, so that's a 5th fret, but 2 strings away. So the perfect 5th was 1 string away, and that's an octave. 2 frets away. 2 frets away, 2 strings away. Perfect 5th. There are a couple of melodies that use an octave in it because I think it's easy, even though it's hard to sing for some singers, it's a sound we can latch onto. Of course, Somewhere Over the Rainbow. This is like the main one. Over the rainbow. And then also Blue Bossa has it as well as the Christmas song, Chestnuts Roasting, that's an ascending octave. Descending, again, not terribly a whole bunch in the jazz world, but there's a tune called Willow Wheat for Me, which is like a ballad or bluesy sort of slow swing. That starts with a descending octave. Da-da-da, da-da-da. So that's something you can latch onto as well as another sort of Broadway related thing. If you know The Sound of Music really well, there's a tune when Maria is playing with the puppets for the kids, and she's singing a song called The Lonely Goat Herd, and that melody goes up and down in octaves in part of it. So that might be something that you could latch onto as well. So what I want to encourage you to do if you're not familiar with this already, is keep going actually and try to hear intervals that are bigger than an octave. So G to a B, for example, that's a major 3rd, but up an octave is considered a 10th. So being able to hear that and play that is helpful in certain instances, especially if you want to play a double stop for us on bass. Hearing a major 9th, for example, can be really helpful in various instances. G to A, that's the second degree, a major 2nd, but up an octave. There's the octave. So familiarizing yourself not only with these sounds, but really working on them. I've got another video from some time ago that has to do with a particular exercise for working on intervals on the bass. But whatever you do, please try to be very familiar with them. I've got a couple links in that document as well for some more resources, and of course there's a ton of stuff online, but I hope that going over it in a little bit of detail, try to maybe give you some ideas for a little bit more study for yourself, because I promise you it's going to be extraordinarily helpful when you are playing and composing and improvising and so on. Thanks for joining me today. I hope that it was helpful for you. As always, there's a link below, and I've got a new course coming out in September of 2025, and we're going to need these intervals because we're talking about creating walking bass lines, and intervals are a big part of that. Understanding the structure of how one would make one, knowing this stuff is really helpful. So look for that. If you sign up by getting this PDF, you'll get notified about that. Also, I've got a class online through Juilliard that is gonna happen in September as well. That is completely different. It's basically a history and appreciation of the music, of jazz music. And it's 12 weeks, and each week we talk about a different section of time in the history of the music we call jazz. And we talk about the people of that time. We talk about aspects of jazz music and jazz performance for those that might not be as familiar as professional or semi-professional musicians are. And every week we look at that sort of label, that genre, like bebop, through the lens of the tune St. Louis Blues, which is one of the most recorded songs in jazz history. So I found examples from those periods related to things that sort of represent as best I could what was sort of happening in time with jazz during that period of history. So it's a really interesting class, and I hope that you'll check that out as well. Thanks for joining me today. Always remember, straight ahead and strive for tone.